Now we have some, there we go. Just a button. How's it going, everybody? Let's get this tilted down a little bit. That's better. That's not what I wanted. Whoops. There we go. A little bit of a zoom in. How do I save this? Oops. Okay. All right. Yeah, I had to work on sound a little bit, but I think we're good now. Who all is with us? No, it's just an app with joystick-like buttons. Hello, Susan. Ben, do you happen to know where we were, where we left off? I probably have it somewhere. Let's see. Although it's been a little while, hasn't it? It's been a long time. 5 verse 55. Did we finish verse 5? Let's see. Or chapter 5. I have 5 verse 55, but I thought we finished a chapter. Six does not seem familiar, though. I guess we'll go 5:55. If nobody has a better idea of where we're at, since that's what my notes say. Yeah, 55 is a natural stopping point. Hey, Debbie, how are you? Just trying to remember where we left off. I think probably chapter 5, verse 55 is what we're ready for. That's what we'll go with. Wait a couple more minutes and see who else shows up. Sue from St. Joe Mo is with us. Good to see you. Alexa, turn on the fan. It's always hot up here. We will give it 3 more minutes. Start at 7:07. That's kind of our normal. I do not know if Heather was able to get a number of attendees. All right, well, we will go from here. Drop a link in chat. And we will start from verse 55. Now, while Judas and Jonathan were in Gilead, and their brother Simon was in Galilee before Ptolemais, Joseph, son of Zechariah, and Azariah, the commanders of the forces, heard of their brave deeds and of the heroic war they had fought. So they said, "Let us also make a name for ourselves. Let's go up and make war on the nations around us." So they issued orders to the men of the forces that were with them and marched against Jamnia. Horias, I'm guessing. I don't think it's Gorgias. We'll call it Horias. And his men came out of the town to meet them in battle. Then Joseph and Azariah were routed and were pursued to the borders of Judea. As many as 2,000 of the people of Israel fell that day. Thus the people suffered a great rout, because thinking to do a brave deed, they didn't listen to Judas and his brothers. But they did not belong to the family of those men through whom deliverance was given to Israel. The man, Judas, and his brothers were greatly honored in all of Israel, and among the nations, wherever their name was heard, people gathered to them and praised them. So success was not universal. It was not for everyone. They believed that God wanted to deliver Israel through this family. Now, it's easy to believe that in retrospect, right? Because that's what happened. God did deliver Israel through this family. So it's very easy to say God wanted to deliver Israel through this family. I would suspect maybe there's a longer way to get there than that. Like maybe God delivered Israel through the wisdom that he had given to these people, that they were wise, that they knew the right ways to go about battle, the best tactics to use, those kinds of things. So I'm not saying God didn't want to use them, but I think there might be a little bit of, as is often done, using that Deuteronomistic theology, right? When Maccabeus and his brothers did it, it worked. So the theological belief is that God wanted it to work. Whereas when other Israelites failed, it's easy to think God wanted them to fail. Doesn't necessarily mean that that is exactly what happened. Hey, Mike Bowman on YouTube now. Good to see you. But nonetheless, that is what happened. So then Judas and his brothers went out and fought the descendants of Esau. Yeah, this is kind of where we were, actually. I remember talking about this. Judas and his brothers went out and fought the... Are you done? Okay. Judas and his brothers went out and fought the descendants of Esau in the land of the south. He struck Hebron and its villages and tore down its strongholds and burned its towers on all sides. Then he marched to go off into the land... Sophie, stop. Thank you. Her ear itches. What are you going to do? Nah, it wasn't my image, Ben. It was me. Sorry. That was just me freezing. Let's pull up my notes. And let's see what I have specifically. I hope I went this far. Okay, I'll come back to that. Let's continue on. Judas and his brothers went out and fought the descendants of Esau in the land of the south. He struck Hebron and its villages and tore down its strongholds and burned its towers on all sides. Then he marched to go to the land of the Philistines and passed through Marisa. On that day, some priests who wished to do a brave deed, remember the last time we read that, fell in battle, for they went out to battle unwisely. I think the quick lesson here is sometimes just doing something to be brave is not the right way to do it. Judas turned aside to Azotus in the land of the Philistines. He tore down their altars and the carved images of their gods. He burned with fire. He plundered the towns and returned to the land of Judah. Now we move on to chapter 6. King Antiochus was going through the upper provinces when he heard that Elymas in Persia was a city famed for its wealth in silver and gold. Its temple was very rich, containing golden shields, breastplates, and weapons left there by Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian king who first reigned over the Greeks. So he came and tried to take the city and plunder it, but he couldn't, because his plan had become known to the citizens, and they withstood him in battle. So he fled and in great disappointment left there to return to Babylon. Then someone came to him in Persia and reported that the armies had gone into the land of Judah had been routed, and that Lysias had gone first with a strong force, but had turned and fled before the Jews, and that the Jews had grown strong from the arms, supplies, and abundant spoils that they had taken from the armies they had cut down, and that they had torn down the abomination that he had erected on the altar in Jerusalem, and that they had surrounded the sanctuary with high walls as before, and also Beth-zur, his town. When the king heard this news, he was astounded and badly shaken. He took to his bed and became sick from disappointment because things had not turned out for him as he had planned. And I feel that. You ever just go to bed and lay down and just feel sick because things didn't go the way you planned? Been there. Maybe not quite as bad as he did. He ended up lying there for many days because disappointment continually gripped him and he realized that he was dying. So he called all of his friends and said to them, "Sleep has departed from my eyes and I am downhearted with worry." I said to myself, "To what distress have I come? And into what great flood am I now plunged? For I was kind and beloved in my power. But now I remember the wrong I did in Jerusalem. I seized all of its vessels of silver and gold, and I sent to destroy the inhabitants of Judah without good reason. I know that it's because of this that these misfortunes have come upon me. And here I am, perishing of bitter disappointment in a strange land." And I mean, he's not wrong. Then he called for Philip, one of his friends, and made him ruler over all of his kingdom. He gave him the crown and his robe and the signet so that he might guide his son Antiochus and bring him up to be king. Thus King Antiochus died there in the 149th year. When Lysias learned that the king was dead... Ben, are you sure it's not just me freezing? I don't know what to tell you. I'm looking at Facebook and at YouTube, and I'm not frozen on either of those. So you might need to refresh your browser, or I'm not sure, buddy. Freezing for anybody else? I think probably just refresh your browser. When Lysias learned that the king was dead, he set up Antiochus, the king's son, to reign. Lysias had brought him up from boyhood. He named him, nothing's easier, is it? Eupator. We'll call that Eupator. And then we have renewed attacks from Syria. Meanwhile, the garrison in the citadel kept hemming Israel in around the sanctuary. They were trying in every way to harm them and strengthen the nations. Judas therefore resolved to destroy them and assembled all the people to besiege them. They gathered together and besieged the citadel in the 150th year, and he built siege towers and engines of war. But some of the garrisons escaped from the siege, and some of the ungodly Israelites joined them. They went to the king and said, "How long will you fail to do justice and avenge our kindred? We were happy to serve your father, to live by what he said and to follow his commands. For this reason, the sons of our people besieged the citadel and became hostile to us. Moreover, they've put to death as many of us as they have caught." and they have seized our inheritances. It is not against us alone that they have stretched out their hands. They have also attacked the lands of their borders. And see, today, they've encamped against the citadel in Jerusalem to take it. They've fortified both the sanctuary and Beth-Zur. Unless you quickly prevent them, they'll do greater things, and you will not be able to stop them. Hey, Jennifer, good to see you this evening. It just beeped. I think this did. Let me turn this off. Okay. Okay. They're upset. The king was enraged when he heard this. He assembled all of his friends. I'm curious, because in my version of scripture, friends here is capitalized. Why would it be capitalized? Okay. Philoi is the Greek, which, as you know, Philadelphia is city of brotherly love. Delphia meaning city, Philio meaning brotherly. So friends are, another way to put that would be brothers. And so it's not really saying his friends, it's using that term as a collective noun for a set of officers, basically. And in fact, that's probably... So it's not his friends, the commanders of his forces, and those in his authority. It's his friends. And the friends, with the capital F, Filio, were the commanders of his forces and those in authority. Mercenary forces also came to him from other kingdoms and from islands of the seas. The number of his forces was 100,000 foot soldiers, 20,000 horsemen, 32 war elephants. They came through Idumea and encamped against Beth-Zur, and for many days they fought and built engines of war. But the Jews sallied out and burned these with fire and fought courageously. I am curious. I'm just thinking Mad Max, right? Engines of war. So it's kind of what you would imagine, like you've seen in Lord of the Rings and fantasy novels and things like that. The giant trebuchets and catapults and things like that they pulled out on wheels, and elephants would probably be pulling them because they'd be so big, and they would have these giant explosives going and all that kind of stuff. So they had these incredible weapons, and yet it wasn't enough, because if God is for us, who could be against us? Then Judas marched away from the citadel and encamped at Beth-Zechariah, opposite the camp of the king. Early in the morning, the king set out and took his army by a forced march along the road to Beth-Zechariah, and his troops made ready for battle and sounded their trumpets. They offered the elephants the juices of grapes and mulberries to arouse them for battle. I mean, that'll get me going. They distributed the animals among the phalanxes. With each elephant, they stationed 1,000 men armed with coats of mail, with brass helmets on their heads, and 500 picked horsemen were assigned to each beast. These took their position beforehand wherever the animal was. Wherever it went, they went with it, and they never left it. On the elephants, and I want to see what this footnote is. Okay, nothing fancy. On the elephants were wooden towers, strong and covered. They were... You've seen this too, right? You've seen pictures of elephants with like these giant people riding on them. It's like that. fastened on each animal by special harnesses, and on each were 4 armed men who fought from there, and also its Indian driver. The rest of the cavalry were stationed on either side of the 2 flanks of the army to harass the enemy while being themselves protected by the phalanxes. When the sun shone on the shields of gold and brass, the hills were ablaze with them and gleamed like flaming torches. Is this awesome or what? This is like nothing in the Bible I've ever read before. I mean, you get some military stuff like, in Jericho and, maybe a little bit about the Romans, but not much. You get a little bit, but it just says like, the Babylonians came in and conquered. You don't get, this is cinematic. Like, this is some of the stuff I think they used when writing fantasy movies and television shows and things like that. I could show you movies that are exactly like this. This is actually really cool. Too bad it's not part of the real canon. Now, a part of the king's army was spread out on the high hills, and some troops were on the plain, and they advanced steadily and in good order. All who heard the noise made by their multitude, by the marching of the multitude, and the clanking of their arms, trembled, for the army was very large and strong. But Judas and his army advanced to the battle, and 600 of the king's army fell. Now, Eleazar, called Avaron, saw that one of the animals was equipped with royal armor. It was taller than all the others, and he supposed that the king was on it. So he gave his life to save his people and to win for himself an everlasting name. He courageously ran into the midst of the phalanx to reach it. He killed men right and left, and they parted before him on both sides. He got under the elephant, stabbed it from underneath, and killed it, but it fell to the ground upon him, and he died. I would assume so, Ben, yeah. When the Jews saw the royal might and the fierce attack of the forces, they turned away in flight. Judas and his army advanced to the battle, and 600 of the king's army fell. Okay. I'm a little confused. Eleazar was one of the Maccabean brothers. So this is something that the Maccabeans did. He saw that this animal was equipped with royal armor. He figured the king was on it. So he went out there, killed people left and right, got underneath it, stabbed the elephant, killed it, and then the elephant fell on him and he died. But he made a name for himself. So the next verse is just confusing, I guess. 47, when the Jews saw the royal might and the fierce attack of the forces, they turned away in flight. I would have thought that would have emboldened them, but I guess not. Still a cool story. The soldiers of the king's army went up to Jerusalem against them, and the king encamped in Judea and at Mount Zion. He made peace with the people of Bethzur and evacuated the town because they had no provisions there to withstand a siege, since it was a sabbatical year for the land. If you remember history, I think it was every 7 years, just like a Sabbath is every 7 days. They did not plant on the land. I'm sure they believed that this was for religious purposes. In reality, it's kind of like rotating crops that they do now. Farmers do. They'll plant corn in a field for a year, maybe 2 at the most, and then they'll plant soybeans in that field. And by rotating the crops, you don't get the same crop eating up the same nutrients year after year after year. And this is what sort of the sabbatical year for not planting crops would do. It would restore a lot of the nutrients to the ground, so crops would grow better. And again, believing that good things happen when you do good things and bad things happen when you do bad things, they would assume that it was a holy thing and not necessarily just a smart thing. Sometimes the science follows the religion. Often the science follows the religion. And often the religion, is that the right way to say that? Often it's science thought of as religion, right? Because it really was the scientific method. hey, we planted these crops, and I noticed that by the 7th year, we're getting very poor yield. Maybe God wants us not to plant that year. And they could easily have said, maybe we shouldn't plant that year, but they're going to prescribe everything to God. And they didn't. And so they had a thesis that if they didn't plant for a year, the year that they planted later, they would get more crops, and they did. I mean, that is the scientific method. It's just has a lens through religion instead of science, because there wasn't a whole lot of science going on in 143 BC. I think it's pretty cool. Okay, onward. The king took Bethzur and stationed a guard there to hold it. Then he encamped before the sanctuary for many days. He set up siege towers, engines of war, devices to throw fire and stones. Those would have been the engines of war, really. Machines to shoot arrows and catapults. The Jews also made engines of war to match theirs and fought for many days, but they had no food in storage because it was the 7th year. Those who had found safety in Judea from the nations had consumed the last of the stores. Only a few men were left in the sanctuary, the rest scattered to their own homes, for the famine proved too much for them. Then Lysias heard that Philip, whom King Antiochus, while still living, had appointed to bring up his son Antiochus to be the king, had returned from Persia and Media with the forces that had gone with the king, and that he was trying to siege control of the government. So he quickly gave orders to withdraw and said to the king, to the commanders of the forces, and to the troops, daily we grow weaker. Our food supply is scant, the place against us in which we are fighting is strong, and the affairs of the kingdom press urgently upon us. Now then, let's come to terms with these people, and let's make peace with them and with their nation. Let's agree to let them live by their laws as they did before, for it was on their account of their laws that we abolished, that they became angry and did all these things. The king said, yeah, that sounds right. The commanders agreed, and so he sent the Jews an offer of peace. And they accepted it. So the king and the commanders gave them their oath, and on these conditions the Jews evacuated the strongholds. But when the king entered Mount Zion and saw what a strong fortress the place was, he broke the oath that he had sworn and gave orders to tear down the wall all around it. Then he set off in haste and returned to Antioch. He found Philip in control of the city, but he fought against him and took the city by force. And you just don't make a deal with the people of God and then break it. That never ends well. What do you guys think so far? Go ahead. I'll wait. Type it out. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. Tell me what you think, what you really, really think. Is this cool stuff or what? You can see it, right? It's very cinematic. It was a dirty deal when the king saw the stronghold and took advantage. It was. It was a dirty deal. I don't think it's going to end well for him. It is very descriptive, isn't it? And interesting how the Israelites seem to keep up. I mean, the numbers are not even close. Like the number of Israelites are not close to the number of like the Assyrians and the other people that are coming against them. But the Israelites keep up, and they have the technology. That's interesting, right? Because what's one thing that Israel leads the world in today? Technology. Amazing technology in Israel. That's not new. They had amazing technology back in these times too. I want to check out a little something. I want to go back and just dig into a little bit about Esau. So we've heard of the Edomites. I'm trying to remember. I feel like is it Ruth? No. Where's Ruth from? I know she's from Bethlehem. Not Ruth. No, Ruth, yeah. Where's Ruth from? Moab. That's it. Okay. So the Edomites were descendants of Esau. That's what they were called. Jacob's twin, obviously. And then they got renamed at one point. They had sort of been forced away from their land into Idumea, which we've talked about. Yeah, specifically defensive technology. That's very true. Although they've had some pretty offensive technology as well, right? The pagers, amazing stuff that they've done. But yeah, they're defensive. They prefer defensive technology, and from my perspective, I don't see them going on the offensive unless sometimes the best defense is a good offense, but they typically react rather than. I mean, they're trying to defend their home. Anyway, so the Esau's children became the Edomites. They became the Idumeans. Okay, and they were constantly in the conflict with the Jews in Israel, and that's kind of what we've got going on. That's mostly. The Maccabeans have conflicts with more than one group of people, but one group of people that they constantly have conflicts with are the Idumeans. So, in a very real sense, Jacob is still fighting Esau because the descendants of Jacob are fighting the descendants of Esau. And I think this is where this notion, I mean, think about this. Think about it like, try to remove your religious bias and think about it strictly from a historical point of view and what happened. And as you remove your religious bias, take God out of it, because that's the only way that you can remove your religious bias. And these people who are fighting in the region of the Middle East believe in different gods. I know they say it's the same God, but it's not the same God, right? We don't actually think, and they don't either, right? I mean, this should not be offensive. I would welcome a conversation with any Muslim about this. We would agree that the God of Abraham is the God that we worship, but we would not agree that the nature of God as we understand God is the same. So I don't think a Muslim agrees that the Christian God and the Muslim God are the same God. So let's take God out of it and let's look at this. Let's look at just the battle up to this point. Now, keep in mind, part of the point of studying the Maccabean revolt is to look at what happens after that to the present day. We are going to take this to the present day. So what you have is a birthright that belongs to Esau, the older brother. And that birthright is the land promised by God. In this case, we can keep the notion of God because we can agree that this is the same God. This is the God who promised the land. And you have Jacob who came in and stole the birthright. Right? Does anybody disagree that Jacob stole the birthright? Speak now or forever hold your peace. I mean, I'll show you the scripture. We've read the scripture. We've studied together. Jacob stole the birthright. He deceived his father. Okay, did he steal it? Maybe not. He traded a bowl of soup for it. That's not stealing. That's one person giving up something that had eternal value for something that had momentary value. So that part I can say, no, he didn't steal it exactly. But then he dressed like Esau, right? He put on fur and made his arms hairy so that he could trick his father into receiving the blessing of the firstborn. And that he did steal. What we've never talked about, and what I've never actually gone in and examined from a legal perspective, is, did it matter? Had Esau already given up the birthright? But if Esau had already given it up, why did Jacob have to trick his father? Can we agree that it's not cut and dry? Can we agree that there is some confusion about it? Can we agree that if you were on one side or the other, you could probably make an argument about whether Jacob or Esau technically deserved the birthright? I think so. I think if you remove religion from it, you could make that argument. And that is what has happened, right? So they're fighting over the land. The descendants of Jacob and the descendants of Esau are both saying, our father deserves this land and we're going to fight for it. And so they're fighting for it. I don't think that has anything to do with it, Ben. Esau was the oldest. And that's what gave him the birthright, not just because his father favored him. Now, his father favoring Esau was wretched in the same way that their mother favoring Jacob was wretched. It's not something parents should do. But I don't think that has any legal ramification. Or not even legal. I don't think it has any ramification on what happened. Two things happened. One is Jacob had Esau trade his birthright, and then Jacob stole the blessing from his father. And I don't know which of those are binding. I don't know if it took both. I don't know if getting the birthright from Jacob or from Esau was enough, and the blessing was a completely separate thing. I don't know the legal ramification of it. I'm merely trying to say that it's complex if you remove religion from it. Now, if you add in religion again, Judeo-Christian religion, then there's no question for us. Our tradition, our religion, our belief is that one way or another, Jacob got the birthright, and that God ordained it, God blessed it, God allowed it, God honored it, and therefore the land belongs to the descendants of Jacob. And that's where we are today. But that is sort of where, I think, where this battle over Israel and the Middle East started. Now, there's a lot more to it now, and we'll get into the history of the 6 days conflict, and the sort of, what do you call the zone between two areas? Like demilitarized zone, I guess. I think there's another name for it. Yeah, I think demilitarized zone is what I'm thinking of. We'll talk about all that. I just want us to understand. I'm not asking you to change what you believe. I'm not changing what I believe. Yeah, neutral zone. Thank you. That's what I was trying to think of. They're kind of in this neutral zone. But you also have, there's another word, displaced, right? Like you have a place where there was part that was considered Palestine, and Palestinians built homes there. And then that part was given to Israel. And so Israel then owned those homes. know how you deal with something like that. And the Palestinians who lived there didn't want to leave, and they never accepted that that was part of Israel. And so that's part of the conflict now. But we don't even have to get into that. That's way in the future. That's barely in our past. It's way in the future of what we're talking right now. I'm talking about the inception of the battle over Israel, the war in the Middle East. And I think it begins. I think it begins when Jacob grabs the heel of Esau, trying to beat him out of the womb. Um, I think basically, and let's not worry about Trump yet. Let's not even say that word. We just don't need to. Um, we can end there, but let's not jump ahead there. This is actually, to answer your question, who gave part of Palestine to Israel? I'm almost positive it would be the United Nations. In like 6 Days War was 67, I think in like 1947. The United Nations kind of divided it up as a way of hoping to make peace, and the Israel said, okay, that's perfect, and the Arabs said, no way, and they've been kind of at war since then. And there was a war immediately after that, like in 1948, which kind of gets lost to history because it was so close on the heels of World War II, the Arab-Israeli War, where Israel declared independence. And so then you've got the sort of the beginning of the two-state problem, right? And then 1967, you have the 6 Days War, where Israel fought Egypt, Jordan, Palestine, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. And that's when they got the West Bank. Okay, 6 Days War, they got the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and some other stuff. I'm sorry, I will really study this when we get there. We're not there, but when we get there, I will really study this, and I will be able to answer all of your questions. But that's when it happened. Okay, so Palestine was sort of partitioned by the United Nations in 1947, and then in 1948 there was the Israeli-Arab War, where Israel declared independence, and then in 67 was the 6 Days War, where Israel captured like some of the stuff that we're fighting over today, like the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. That stuff I'm certain of. And I don't think there's any arguments about that. I think that's historical fact of what happened. And then you asked a question, I think. Oh, I don't know about the capital thing. The capital was Tel Aviv until Trump's first term. Just doing a quick Google. It was more about, okay, you keep throwing stuff at me, Ben. I can't even keep up with your previous questions. Um, I think it was more about the embassy than about the the capital at first. So in 1995, the United States moved their embassy to Jerusalem. Officially. It's okay, Ben. We'll get there. Officially, in 1995, the U.S. moved their embassy to Jerusalem. But they included a provision that allowed them to delay the physical move for national security reasons. And Clinton, Bush, and Obama all exercised that waiver. So the embassy never got moved. And then in Trump's first term, he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I don't know, and I will learn about this later, I don't know how Israel, if they always felt that Jerusalem was their capital. I don't know. I don't know if they were mixed minds about it. I don't know. But Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital. And he did not exercise the waiver, and he ordered the U.S. Embassy to be moved to Jerusalem. And then in 2018, the U.S. Embassy opened in Jerusalem. Okay, so as a whole, Israel's leaders praised the decision, viewing it as recognition of Jerusalem's status as their capital. So I guess they did mostly see it. Palestinians hated it. They condemned it, seeing it as a bias against their claims to East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state. So that is part of the problem. And we can talk about Jerusalem itself too. Remember, the city itself of Jerusalem is split. When you go to the city, when you go to Jerusalem, there is a mosque on the top of it next to the temple. The city itself is split because they believe that Muhammad flew his flying horse and landed on the top of there, and God gave it to him to be the capital of their future. And I'm not even going to address that. That's the history of it. That's all I have to say about that. So the Palestinians they hated that Trump recognized Jerusalem as their capital, because in their mind, half of Jerusalem is going to be the capital of their future state. And therefore, it's not right for anyone to recognize Jerusalem as a whole as the capital of Israel. So that's that part. So it's not so much that Trump made Jerusalem the capital of Israel, because Trump doesn't have the authority to do that. Trump made Jerusalem the location of the embassy, which is traditionally, I think, in the capital of a nation. And for the Israelites, that justified, or it was the same thing as recognition of Jerusalem as their capital. Oh, you said that. You said recognized. Sorry, I missed that line. Yeah, so you're right about that. Answer the question about who gave Palestine to Israel. And now the peace accords. I don't know about that. I don't know how that fits in the story, but we'll end all of this with sort of the current stat. We'll start with the UN resolution in 47, the Israeli Arab War in 46, the 6 Days War, in 48, the 6 Days War in 67, and then any peace accords that have happened since then, including Carter's, including what Trump did in his first term, including all the stuff that we'll wrap all that up and try to look at that later. But to get back to sort of the ending point, and we are going to stop, and we are at the beginning of chapter 7. So let me write that down. First Mac, chapter 7, start. Okay. What I wanted to sort of get at was the beginning of the conflict, not where it's at right now, the beginning of the conflict. And I think the beginning of the conflict was Jacob holding on to the heel of Esau, trying to get out first, and spending his entire life scheming to become first, even though he wasn't first. Mixed in with Esau's short-sightedness, his desire for the current and not the future, and I'm sure by the way the Israelites viewed things not being worthy of the birthright, making Jacob's acquisition of the birthright not only fair, but righteous. And then from then all the way to 150 years before the birth of Christ, which is where we're at right now, we still have the descendants of Jacob fighting the descendants of Esau for their homeland. I think. What do you guys think? That's all we're going to talk about tonight. So if you've got something to think it. Ben, I like your questions. Don't mistake. I was just trying to keep up with you. But your questions make for good digging. So at least now, if somebody says, I don't see why this is so complicated, maybe you've got something to have a conversation about. Yeah, the problem about the movie, Ben, is that somebody would have to write it, and somebody would have to produce it, and somebody would have to direct it, and people would have to act in it. And then it's going to be vastly open to interpretation. But yeah, it'd be pretty wild. Well, I meant the whole thing. Maybe you meant just the part we're talking about today. Yeah, it would be cool to see the elephants with the armor and the people riding on them, and one guy sliding underneath the elephant and killing him, and the king falling. Yeah, it's very cinematic. All right, guys. Well, that's going to be it for today. We will be back next week. Same time, same bat time, same bat channel. So God bless, Godspeed, and as always, thanks for watching.